How are you?
Hey, good. Good, thanks.
What's the problem? I guess it should be, first off, what is this plan, and why do you feel that it's not being operated successful in Missouri?
So the plan is how the state is going to turn around its lowest performing schools, generally the bottom 5%. It's part of the state's obligations under the new federal law, the Every Student Succeeds Act. Back in December 2015, this replaced No Child Left Behind as the sort of federal education law of the land. So the state is going to submit a plan to the U.S. Department of Education for approval in September, and this is part of it. So they have to explain exactly what they're going to do, how they're going to make these schools stop failing. The problem, and this is based on a presentation that was given to the state board indicating their plans. The problem with the plan is that it's not really much of one at all. It's just sort of some pretty words, some empty language, vague, unimaginative, and just really shows no sign of actually being successful in actually turning these schools around for the state's often most disadvantaged kids. So we think there's actually a much better way. There's a few ways that other states who have already submitted plans, about 17 did in April. They have some strategies for turning these schools around that have been proven to work with evidence. So we think that the state should sort of allow every school and every school district to sort of choose from this menu of effective options.
Touch on some of those options briefly.
So it really just comes down to changing the people who are in charge of the school. So although people, I'm sure, mean well, these schools aren't doing well, right? So one of the easiest ways to turn anything around is to change who's in charge. So there's three levels, essentially, that you can do this at. One is the school level, the second is the local level, and the third is the state level. So for the school level, the easiest way to do that is essentially to convert the school or move these students in the school to a new charter school. That's not going to be as popular in the state because the state has a very small charter sector. It's sort of doubled in the last decade, but it's still less than 100 schools. I wish that would expand. I think that would be a good thing, but that may not be as feasible. So the other option is finding a group of people in the local school district area who have school experience, giving them a little bit more autonomy. If the district can afford it, maybe a little more cash, and sort of setting them free to try their hand at different ways to improve the school. We generally call that a receivership, but it's a fairly simple idea. And then the third way at the state level is to allow the state to sort of pick and choose schools throughout the state, sort of peppered around various areas, and then combine those into sort of a pseudo school district and take charge of it from the state level. We've seen this work really well, for example, in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. So again, all three of these options have been proven to work in other places. Charter schools have shown great results in a lot of places. There are good and bad ones, of course, but the good ones are often very good. And the local option I mentioned earlier, that's worked in a small area in Massachusetts. So again, the state's current plan is just sort of empty and vague and unnecessary. And they should be more specific and give schools and school districts more options with how to turn around their failing schools.
Here's a question for you, though. If you're focusing on specific schools and you're giving them, in essence, more money, what's going to happen when the schools in other districts are going to say, wait a minute, this is unequal funding, and by law, we should have the same amount of monies going in? And we've seen this happen around a number of states in the country where school districts say, look, if they're going to get a new gym or a pool or this type of facility, we should have the same amount of money to do the same thing for our students. So how do you get around the legal aspect of that?
Yeah, it's certainly a difficult political fix. Part of the problem, though, is is that the state is obligated to turn these schools around under the federal law with all the funding that they get from the federal from the federal level. So they don't really have an option, but I understand that it's also a political concern. What I would say is that these are the schools, these are the state's worst schools. They are failing kids year after year after year, and generally these are the state's most disadvantaged kids. High poverty, high rates of other challenges, and they deserve to go to a borderline even functional school, and they aren't. So it's within the public's interest, it's basically in the public good to ensure that every child in the state has a good education, and sometimes that means that high poverty sort of struggling schools get more cash. That's really just the way it is across the entire country, right?
Okay.
Certain things need more resources. So I guess I would simply urge policymakers to try to make it clear to taxpayers that this is in everybody's interest. This is meant to better the lives of the state's most disadvantaged people.
Brandon, thank you very much for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Brandon Wright, editorial director for the Thomas B. Fordham Institute. He had an interesting op-ed in the recent edition of the